Oh, I think I had to step away from this idea that you have to hustle to be successful.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 125 of the Strokecast. After a stroke, when we live with physical, emotional, cognitive, and neurological disabilities, it may be time to rethink our professional careers. Maybe a professional job is no longer something we want or are able to have. Maybe we lost our job because of the time off we had to take. Whether it's born of necessity or desire, going into business for ourselves may be an option. But how can you do that with disabilities? Well, this week, I talked with Nicole Neer, the Spooniepreneur. Nicole helps Spoonies, people with disabilities or chronic illness, launch and manage their own businesses. Is the entrepreneurial life right for you? Are you thinking about going forward as a Spooniepreneur? We talk about some of the advantages and challenges of doing so this week. So now, let's meet Spooniepreneur Nicole Neer. So Nicole, thanks so much for joining us on Strokecast this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your background is fascinating, and I think a lot of folks will benefit from this. I mean, you're not a stroke survivor, but have lived with disabilities. And I think there's a lot of things that our audience here can learn from your experience here. So I guess let's start with, how does your experience with chronic illness impact your life?
Well, I certainly never expected my life to be, living with chronic illness. I really started getting sick 4 years ago when I turned 30. And so it came on after, I thought I was kind of entering the prime of my life. I have 5 different chronic illnesses. I have fibromyalgia, bipolar disorder, anxiety, irritable bowel syndrome, and I have sleep apnea. It's like, it's a whole list because, one is not enough.
Right. You're working on a full house right there.
Right. And it basically means that I live with a lot of pain and fatigue. I have GI issues, and I feel, anxious pretty much all of the time. But what it's meant for me is that I'm also not really able to hold down the quote unquote traditional 9-to-5 job. It would just be too much. And I have to use mobility aids to get around. So anytime I want to go somewhere, it can kind of be a whole production.
Right. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of folks who aren't living with disability don't ever really have to think about. Is just, even when you talk about the production, just the sheer extra time that's involved in wrangling canes or walkers or crutches or wheelchairs or any of those things.
Yeah, it's hard to go someplace by yourself.
Right. And the other thing I know that you mentioned that a lot of us who have been through stroke certainly experience is that neurofatigue, that just different level of exhaustion that you encounter.
Yeah, people say, oh, I know what it's like to be tired. And it's like, no, this is a whole different kind of tired.
Exactly. I've tried to describe it as it's like normally for most people, your cell phone goes from 100 to 90 to 80 to 70, et cetera, et cetera. For folks living with the neurofatigue, it starts at 60, drops straight to 50, 40, 10, 5, 1.
Right.
You said this all started happening really when you hit about age 30. So, I mean, what was your life like in your pre-chronic illness days?
I had just landed my dream job. I was working as a social worker, and I worked my way up from being like case manager, which is kind of like low man on the totem pole, to being director in 5 years. And while I was doing that, I also got my master's degree. So like, I don't know when I slept. And of course, if you're living with chronic illness, especially something like fibromyalgia, which I have, that a lot of time, we're type A's, we're high achievers, and we just burn out or have some kind of really stressful experience that triggers our symptoms. And that's certainly what happened for me. I've had irritable bowel syndrome and anxiety since I was a teenager. And looking back, I can kind of see the start of fibromyalgia in my 20s, but it didn't get really bad until right around 30. And I ended up having to just quit my job cold turkey, nothing else lined up on the other side, just to try to salvage my health.
Oh, wow. That's certainly scary when that happens. I know a lot of folks in our community, have that similar experience where all of a sudden your life changes and you just have to stop and do things differently. And I think one of the things you mentioned there too, when you're talking about being type A and burning through all this energy, you mentioned living with sleep apnea as well. And when I was diagnosed with my sleep apnea, it was sort of a revelation to realize that I hadn't actually been well rested in about 30 years.
Yeah, that's my newest diagnosis. I just got it at the end of last year. And, when I started sleeping with my CPAP, it was just I remember the first day I woke up and it was just like, oh, like I actually had a good night's sleep. I didn't realize how much it would impact me.
Right. It's like, hey, you're not supposed to wake up groggy every morning.
Right.
Who knew?
Yeah.
With not being able to do the traditional corporate job anymore. And well, actually, before I go on, when you were working as a social worker then, was your work with a lot of communities of people with disabilities, or was it a different aspect of social work?
It was entirely I worked as a play therapist for a long time with children with special needs, like under the age of 3. And I certainly, I had the experience. I had a sibling who had disabilities. So I kind of knew it from the other side of it. But living it just feels so much different.
Yeah, it's one thing to be adjacent to it. It's another thing to actually go through it.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, you need to come up with a different solution. You sort of describe yourself now as a Spooniepreneur.
Yeah.
So before we get into that, I know I've gotten in the habit of just using the term without actually defining it too often. But what do you mean when you say a spoonie? Where does that term come from?
Oh, so the spoon theory was started by Christine Maladrino from ButYouDon'tLookSick.com. And basically, she was sitting with her friend at a diner one night, and her friend asked her, what does it really feel like to live with chronic illness? And so she went around the tables and she got 7 spoons in her hand. And she started talking about all of the energy it takes to do certain tasks. And so her friend was like, oh, well, 1 spoon to get up in the morning and get ready for work. And Christine stopped her and said, no, it's 1 spoon to get out of bed, 1 spoon to shower, maybe 2 if you have to wash your hair, another spoon to go get breakfast. And she said by that time you've already used 4 spoons and you haven't even left the house for the day. And that really resonated with me, thinking about all of the decisions that we make in a day when you're living with any kind of chronic illness or disability, about how to spend your time and energy so you can do the most with your day. And it was also a really helpful way to explain to friends and family what it was like to make those decisions. In our household, the phrase, quite honestly, oh, there aren't enough spoons for that, right? Like it became something that I really resonated with. And then I started finding Spoonies on Instagram and in Facebook groups, and realized that it was just a way for us, kind of a inside term for us to find each other and to talk about our experience with the world.
It's a great analogy that I found a similar experience. It really helps with trying to identify this for a lot of other folks. And when we start talking about some things like not only that neurofatigue that we were talking about earlier, where that's sort of what happens when you're out of spoons, when you've spent your spoons for the day, but just the cognitive processing that can be involved in just living those types of things. Just being in a high stimulation environment can cost spoons for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
So to get back to being a Spooniepreneur, someone with chronic illness and living with disabilities and needing to make money. So, I mean, what do you do as a Spooniepreneur? How did you go ahead and get into business for yourself?
So when I was working in social work, we would have events for families and we would talk about the work we were doing. And quite honestly, I was the person who always did the marketing. I started out, when I went to college, I wanted to be a writer. I started working with kids and that kind of went out the window. But I always loved to write. I was very creative. I could, come up with graphics. And so, when I transitioned into needing to find something new, I learned about the term virtual assistant. And virtual assistants can do a lot of different things, but I started out doing social media marketing. I worked for myself, I set my own hours, and it was really a revelation. And so right now, I still run the business that I started 4 years ago, Bloom Administrative Services, which is a full service virtual support agency. We help entrepreneurs to streamline and market their businesses. I have a team of 6 people who work with me now. It's not just me. But then throughout the years, as I started talking about my experience as a Spoonie and as an entrepreneur, I had a lot of people ask me how it was even possible to live with chronic illness or disabilities and to run a business. Because I think a lot of people think that, living with disability is just too much and you couldn't, put all the time and stress, quite honestly, of a business on top of it. And I knew it was possible. So I started mentoring Spoonies who were looking to build or scale their businesses in ways that really work around their illness.
Are the other members of your team, are they also Spoonies?
A few are, not all of them are.
We can talk a little bit about energy levels and things like that, the things that we've already been talking about as far as Spoonies go. But what are some of the challenges that you see Spoonies facing as entrepreneurs and business owners that maybe Ables do not face?
I think that for many Spoonies, it is a challenge to work for long periods of time or to stick to really strict schedules. That's a big reason why people need to leave the traditional 9-to-5 job, because just sitting there and having to do that for 8 hours a day is just not conducive to life with a chronic illness. So we need to build businesses that are flexible so that we can work whenever we're able. We also have to make the most of that limited time because a lot of us are seeing doctors or specialists or going to therapy, and we're trying to save some spoons so we can have time with our loved ones. It's a lot of navigating when you're trying to start a business and you have a chronic illness.
As you've been then working with customers and seeing your other clients work with their clients, are you seeing Spoonies face additional challenges regarding ableism or customers who don't want to work with people with disabilities? Or are you seeing a lot of that, or are you not seeing a ton of that out there?
It is a thing. I know certainly at the beginning of my business, I didn't tell people that I was sick because I very much felt like they would look down on me. And what I eventually realized is that I don't want to work with people who don't accept all the parts of who I am. And so I'm very open about my illness. I'm very open about my experience because it weeds people out. If people are going to be jerks about it, then they're not a good fit for working with me. And most people, I would say 99% of people, are really great and gracious about it. And it's not a deal. It's not a big deal.
Well, good. It's great. That's been the experience you've been able to have with that. I know I sort of adopted a similar perspective when I was job hunting, and I had to decide, do I really want to go ahead and mention on my LinkedIn profile or whatever that I've survived the stroke, that I do have some of these disabilities, and how that informs my experience, or should I just sort of keep that hidden? And I realized, look, if I ever get to an interview, they're going to notice my left arm not working. They're going to see the cane. This is not like something I can hide. So let's filter that stuff out to begin with.
Yeah.
On the flip side, do you think there are advantages that Spoonies have in running a business that people without disabilities do not have?
Oh, there are so many. Because I truly believe that a lot of the skills that Spoonies master very early on are those that people who do not have disabilities really struggle with. Like, for example, many able-bodied entrepreneurs, if they have a failure in business, which everybody does, they really struggle to pick themselves up when they fail. Like, it's a bruise to their ego and they don't want to go forward. And it's a whole crisis for them. But for Spoonies, we're very much used to having things fall apart. I tell my clients it's not a matter of if your symptoms are going to flare or if your disability is going to impact your business, but when. And so because we're used to picking ourselves up and we're able to be resilient to cope with what life throws our way, our businesses are able to evolve a lot faster. Spoonies have a really great ability to manage their time. We're very used to counting our spoons and figuring out what we have the energy for. And that makes us so much more efficient. We know that we can't just work another hour on the end of the day. So we find a way to get it all done when we're able to sit down and do the work.
Well, I think that's a really interesting way to look at that too, with that whole budgeting of the spoons. I imagine that also then gives a lot of us sort of some of those core skills for budgeting, budget on a business or even building a product plan that that's realistic with deadlines that can be met.
Yeah, I think being realistic can be a struggle, especially for Spoonies, because, a lot of us are type A. We want to believe that we can do all of the things. But I think when we're realistic with what we can do and realize that, we just have to be consistent, it doesn't mean that, you're not going to do those things. It just might take longer. I think when we're realistic, that's when people start to see success.
Well, I think you said a really important word there too, and that is consistent.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the value of consistency?
One of the biggest lessons that I have learned is that we get to decide what consistency looks like for us. And I think a lot of when you're a new entrepreneur and you're, learning about how to run your business, how to market your business, how to set up all the systems, a lot of the methodologies that are taught are very much based on this idea that you work really hard and then you reap the benefits. And when you have a chronic illness, you can't do it all usually in this concentrated time. Like you can't spend 90 days and do everything in your business. And we want to give up. But the truth is that if you can just show up and post on social media 2 times a week and maybe work on your product for a couple of hours a week, and you do that every week, you're still going to see results. It's not about the amount you're able to do. It's about that you're showing up consistently. I think that's the most important thing.
And the more you can do with consistency, the more of a pattern you can build up. And one of the things we talk a lot about in the stroke survivor community and rehab is that it's about doing the repetitions. It's about building the plan and doing that same thing, building that pattern over and over and over again so that you can make it repeatable, because that's ultimately how you can recover skills that you need.
Absolutely.
In this, with technology, which has really just opened up so many more doors for people with disabilities. I know back in 2017 when I first entered this world, I was riding around in an Uber tracking a package on Amazon Prime that was due to be delivered and just thinking, boy, having a stroke 10 years ago must have really sucked. Just in the mid-aughts when we didn't have all the technology in the same way. And we already had a lot then that we didn't have 10 years or 20 years before that. But with the advances in technology, it's so much easier to work, wherever you want. Have you found in working with your clients that that there are certain countries where it's more advantageous to be based as a Spooniepreneur, either from a marketing perspective or from a financial perspective, or is that something you've been able to form any observations about?
This is a really great question. One of the things I love about entrepreneurship is for most people, all you really need is a laptop and a good internet connection, and you can do a lot. And I've worked with Spoonies across the world who are doing amazing things with the resources they have. And certainly I think entrepreneurs who, even if they're not US based, who make themselves available on US time zones, tend to see a little bit more success. But really, I've had people that I've worked with in Australia, and they're doing amazing things, and people in Europe who are doing awesome things. So I think to me, it's more about your ability to make the most use of your time, to have a solid internet connection so you connect with people, and then, the rest kind of works itself out.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose related to that also, obviously you talk about the U.S. time zones being so important and so much, of the U.S. market making such a big difference for a lot of that stuff. The flip side is the healthcare model, where I imagine a lot of other countries, with chronic illness, it's expensive. There's all these appointments and whatnot.
Yeah.
And in the U.S., as a Spooniepreneur, you've also, unless you have a partner who is able to include you on their health insurance, you need to then find your own health insurance as an independent business person, which is difficult versus in other parts of the world.
Yeah, for sure. It's, I think, one of the biggest, when I left my job, it was one of my biggest fears because I don't have a partner who can put me on health insurance. So I've had to rely on the healthcare marketplace, which is good and bad. I'm glad it's there, but high deductibles when you have a lot of things going on it's a lot of money out of pocket. Yeah, it's definitely something I think in the US we have to navigate in unique ways, because even people who are on their spouse's insurance, you may or may not be able to see the providers that you really need to see. There are all of these questions of copays and pre-authorizations. I mean, it can be a job in itself to navigate the healthcare system.
Yeah, I know at various points I've thought, a great job for somebody, and hey, maybe there's a Spooniepreneur who wants to go out and do this business, is actually to be just the person, maybe you subscribe to them and they just manage all of your healthcare, insurance paperwork and cost negotiations and all of that for you, so you don't have to deal with it. Right.
That's an amazing job if somebody wants to take it on.
Yeah, I know. I found, because once you suddenly are thrust into this world, and suddenly you have to deal with the bureaucracy in addition to dealing with your own illness, there's just a lot there. Yeah,
it takes a lot of spoons some days to sit on hold for hours just to get somebody who's no help.
Right. So, I could go off on that for an hour or more. But so. Are there resources out there that you've encountered that are really help target folks with chronic illness to start their own businesses or manage their own small businesses, programs, or other resources that you've found that are helpful?
I think when you're living with a chronic illness, it's really easy to feel alone. And there certainly are other Spooniepreneurs, but until you kind of find them, I think it can feel really isolating. I touched earlier on the fact that a lot of the programs that are teaching you how to build a business, they're really great. And what they're teaching is really solid, but they're taught by able-bodied people who don't understand kind of the unique challenges of living with a chronic illness. I know certainly I found a really great community on Instagram. You just search, hashtag Spoonie, and you'll find a whole bunch of people. And there are also some really great Facebook groups that are for Spoonie entrepreneurs. And I think once you tap into that community and kind of see how other people are navigating it, it helps you figure out what your business needs to look like.
And that's a great resource right there. Just those additional hashtags to really become a part of that community. And that's actually one of the things I found is to be one of the real strengths of Instagram, is that the way hashtags allow you to connect with so many other folks and just find those communities. And for some reason, it just seems to work more effectively there than it does on Twitter or some other places.
For sure. I think, Facebook groups is kind of like somebody says, oh, there's this really great Facebook group, but you have to know the person who knows the group. Whereas on Instagram, you just search the hashtags and you find all of these people, and you start up conversations and direct messages, and then you have friends across the world who understand what you're going through.
Yeah, exactly. So if a stroke survivor or a Spoonie wants to start their own business, what should they do first?
You just need to be honest with yourself obviously you're going to want to start with what is your business going to be. You're going to want to build your business plan. And when you're business planning, I really recommend that you focus more on goals that are, I want to grow my Instagram followers to this amount, or I want to launch this program, and not I want to make this amount of money in this amount of time, right? But also taking the time to map out what you need your day to look like. Do you need to work in 1 or 2 hour blocks because of neurofatigue? Do you need to schedule in naps every day? I know I did that for a while. How are you going to handle bad days? What are you going to do on those days when you have a project due and you really don't feel well? Because being honest in advance about what you can do and what you really shouldn't do, because it's going to take too much spoons, that's going to help you make consistent progress.
That's important stuff. I found that just, over a lifetime of customer service related things is that customers are generally going to be okay with whatever happens as long as you provide them with reasonable expectations. Customers tend to get angry when you fail to meet expectations that you've set.
Yeah, you need to over communicate. For example, as a virtual assistant, if I'm not going to be able to deliver on something, you have to be honest. You have to communicate it. You don't wait till the deadline passed and then have the client say, "Where is that?" and then explain. You have to be proactive about it for sure.
So when somebody is looking at a business to launch, how do you navigate the challenges of, do I choose a business that it seems like there's a strong market for it? Do I choose something that I am passionate about? Do I choose something that I have expertise in, but maybe I'm not really passionate about it? How do you navigate those sorts of decisions?
Well, that's a really juicy question. I think
it's kind of like a meaning of life type of thing, I suppose.
Right. And I think if you're living with chronic illness, you need to choose a thing that's going to make you want to go to the computer or to create the thing. It needs to light you up and make you excited. And sometimes that is the most profitable thing that you can do. Sometimes you have a lot of experience and that's why it makes you excited. And sometimes it's something new that you want to try. And maybe you can pull on some past skills, but you've got to learn a whole lot more to do it. But if you are excited and passionate about it, that's what's going to make you show up consistently. And ultimately, you're not going to burn out the way that you would if you're just kind of trying to do something to make a quick buck.
And again, that consistency becomes the key there.
Yeah.
So as you've been working with all these different Spooniepreneurs and just working with other businesses, do you have some favorite Spoonie-owned businesses that you like to patronize?
Oh, well, I've found, I've worked with business coaches before, but they didn't quite understand the whole chronic illness thing. And it wasn't until I found my coach, Raquel Halenga, who's also a Spoonie, that I was able to make a whole lot of progress. So I highly recommend if you're looking to get additional support in your business, try to find a coach who also understands some of your unique needs. But I love Spoonie Sister Shop on Etsy. They have amazing t-shirts that are Spoonie specific. They have blankets, coffee mugs. They're really great gifts to send Spoonie friends or to buy for yourself. I just love supporting those small Spoonie-owned businesses.
Awesome. And we'll include those links over in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So as you've been through this journey, we've talked about consistency, and maybe that's the answer, but what do you think is the biggest lesson that you had to learn to be successful as a Spooniepreneur?
Oh, I think I had to step away from this idea that you have to hustle to be successful. Mm. A lot of business coaches, a lot of business educators, a lot of the blog posts you'll read or the podcasts you'll listen to, they talk about making money really fast. And those business models don't fit a lot of the time when you have chronic illness. I think a really great example is I recently started offering like VIP days for clients who want to set up their podcasts or they want to get solid on their marketing strategy. And I know that a lot of my peers are offering these in just one business day. Like it's just this concentrated day you show up. And the first time I offered a VIP day like that, I had to cancel because I wasn't feeling well. And then even when I rescheduled, I wasn't 100%. And I was super stressed out about it because I knew I wasn't going to show up with my full self. And I realized that I was trying to fit myself into a business model that, yes, it works, but it doesn't work for me. And so when I spread it out over a week, it feels good. The client's happy. They're getting what they want in a really short time frame, and it works for me. And so I think I've had to learn that just because the strategy is great doesn't mean it's great for me. And I get to choose what works for myself and for my business.
And that's one of those things too, when we start talking about even just spreading something out over the course of a week instead of trying to push it all in one day. I know that's one of those things that, you know, as a corporate trainer that I've had to talk with other customers and clients about too. It's like, look, we could do a whole day long virtual training, but nobody is going to be paying attention after the first hour.
Right.
So let's break that up. Let's split it out over the course of time. And it's going to be easier on the instructor. It's going to be easier on the learners, and people are going to learn more, and it's just going to be more effective that way.
Yeah.
So you mentioned podcasting, and you have your own show, the Spooniepreneur podcast. So what do you cover on that show? What is that show about?
On the podcast, I interview Spoonies who are running their own businesses. And I also take people behind the scenes to look at my business so that they can actually get a feel for what it really looks like day to day to be a Spooniepreneur.
So why did you decide to start the show?
When I started talking about being a Spooniepreneur, a lot of people questioned if it was even possible. And I knew it was possible because I had friends who were doing it. And so I decided to start a podcast where I talk to my Spooniepreneur friends and just show people what it looks like in a variety of different fields to be a Spoonie entrepreneur. So we've had Pilates instructors, we've had authors, we've had painters, we've had coaches. And I also get a lot of people hopping into my DMs and asking me specific questions about running businesses as Spoonies. So I'm also able to take people behind the scenes to give them advice that they're not going to hear from an able-bodied business mentor.
That's awesome. I love this. I love this medium. It's such a great way to connect with such a wide variety of people, and it's been an amazing excuse to talk to some fascinating people around the world.
It's literally my favorite thing that I do. It's so much fun.
So, I mean, which guest do you think has surprised you the most?
Oh, gosh. I had the opportunity to talk to my biz bestie, who is an artist who lives in the Netherlands. And
I love that term, biz bestie.
Yeah. I mean, we just connected via Instagram and just immediately hit it off. And I was just really interested to hear about her experience. She had a traumatic brain injury, and just seeing how people are navigating these things in real life. We talked about things that we, never touched on during our conversations before. And I think people really enjoyed kind of getting to see what it actually looks like to do something like fine art when you're living with a traumatic brain injury.
Mm. That's powerful. That's one of those things too that's very interesting that happens where even when it's people you have a personal relationship with, sometimes once you start getting on the mic for a specific purpose, you learn things and things come up that you just might not never have come up in just casual conversation.
Absolutely.
So if somebody wants to go ahead and start their own business and they have these disabilities, what is the single most important piece of advice you would have for them?
You get to decide what consistency looks like in your business. If you can only show up for an hour a day, do it consistently. You're going to see progress. It's just more important that you make time when you can on a consistent basis, because that's when you're going to see progress. I talked to a lot of Spooniepreneurs, and we all agree that I think entrepreneurship is one of the best things you can do if you're living with chronic illness, to be honest, because you're really able to create a life and a business that works for you. So I love talking about being a Spooniepreneur.
And that brings us to our hack of the week.
One of the things that I struggle with is I have neurofatigue. I get brain fog quite frequently, and I forget what I need to do. And I was writing everything on sticky notes, but then sticky notes fall off your computer, like they get lost. So instead of relying on a paper to-do list, I recommend using a free program like Trello. You can find it at Trello.com. They also have an app for your phone. So when you think of something you need to do, open up your phone, put it on basically a virtual sticky note. And then when you go to your to-do list, everything's there. The sticky notes aren't falling down, and you remember exactly what you need to do.
Awesome. So, Nicole, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
If you're interested in listening to the Spooniepreneur podcast, you can check it out at spooniepreneur.net. I also spend way too much time on Instagram, so you can find me at spooniepreneur.pod.
Awesome. And we're going to have all of those links over in the show notes at strokecast.com/spooniepreneur, as well as another short URL I'll come up with so we don't have to worry about trying to figure out how to spell preneur. So, Nicole, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
The entrepreneurial life is not easy, even in the best of times. But then again, neither is stroke recovery. We wouldn't be here doing the work of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, stretching, exercises, home exercise routines, inpatient care, outpatient appointments, Botox and Dysport injections, putting on AFOs or KAFOs, and all of this other stuff if we weren't willing to do things that are hard. We wouldn't work every day to live the best lives we can if we only did easy things. If the idea of going into business for yourself, even if it may be hard, has some appeal, or you just want to learn more about the Spooniepreneur lifestyle, check out Nicole's podcast or reach out to her for her coaching services. If you simply need a virtual assistant, reach out to Nicole as well. And don't worry about the spelling of Spooniepreneur either. Those links are all in the show notes in your podcast app and in the show notes online at strokecast.com/Nicole. So check out that link for more information and for more links. Be sure to follow or subscribe for free to the Strokecast in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.